Section 1 of Stories in Grey. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ian Stewart, Rosanna, Victoria, Australia. Stories in Grey by Barry Payne. Section 1. Smith. Percy Bellows was not actually idle, had a good deal of ability, and wished to make money, but at the age of 35 he had not made it. He had been articled to a solicitor, and, in his own phrase, had turned it down. He had neglected the regular channels of education which were open to him. He could give a conjuring entertainment for an hour, and though his tricks were stock tricks, they were done in the neat professional manner. He could play the cornet and the violin, neither of them very well. He could dance a breakdown. He had made himself useful in a touring theatrical company, but he could not spell correctly, and his grammar was not always beyond reproach. He disliked regularity. He could not go to the same office at the same time every morning. He was thriftless, and he had been, but was no longer, intemperate. He was a big man with smooth black hair and a heavy moustache, and he had the manners of a bully. At the age of 35 he considered his position. He was at that time travelling the country as a hypnotic entertainer under the name of Dr. Sanders Bell. At each of his entertainments he issued a £10,000 challenge, not having at the time 10,000 pence in the world. He employed confederates, and he had to pay them. It was not a good business at all. His gains in one town were always being swallowed up by his losses in another. His confederates gave him constant trouble. But though he turned things over for long in his mind, he could see nothing else to take up. There is no money nowadays for a conjurer without originality, an indifferent musician, or passable actor. His hypnotic entertainment would have been no good in London, but it did earn just enough to keep him going in the provinces. Also, Percy Bellows had an ordinary human weakness. He liked to be regarded with awe as a man of mystery. Even off the stage he acted his part. He had talked delirious science to agitated landladies in cheap lodgings in many towns. Teston was a small place, and Percy Bellows thought that he had done very well after a one-night show to cover his expenses and put £4 in his pocket. He remained in the town on the following day, because he wished to see a man who had answered his advertisement for a confederate. Assistant to a hypnotic entertainer was the phrase Mr. Bellows had used for it. He was stopping at the Victoria Hotel. It was the only hotel in the place, and it was quite bad, but Percy Bellows was used to that. A long course of touring had habituated him to doubtful eggs and indistinguishable coffee. This morning he faced a singularly repulsive breakfast without quailing. He was even cheerful and conversational with the slatternly maid who waited on him. "So you saw the show last night?" he said. "Yes, sir, I did, and very wonderful it was. There's never been anything like it in Teston, not in my memory. Ah, my dear, will you watch this?" He picked up the 2 boiled eggs which had been placed before him. He hurled one into the air, where it vanished. He swallowed the other one whole. He then produced them both from a vase on the mantelpiece. "Well, I never," said the maid. "I wonder if there's anything you can't do, sir?" "Just 1 or 2 things," said Mr. Bellows sardonically. "By the way, my dear, if a man comes here this morning and asks for me, I want to see him." He consulted a soiled letter which he had taken from his pocket. The name Smith. Mr. Smith arrived, in fact, before Bellows had finished his breakfast, and was told he could come in. He was a man of extraordinary appearance. He was a dwarf with a slightly hunched back. His hands were a size too large for him, and were always restless. His expression was one of snarling subservience. At first Bellows was inclined to reject him, for a confederate should not be a man of unusual appearance and easily recognizable. Then it struck him that, after all, this would be a very weird and impressive figure on the stage. "Ever do anything of this kind before?" he asked. "No, sir," said Smith, "but I've seen it done and can pick it up. I think I could give you satisfaction. You see, it's not very easy for a man like me to find work." All the time that he was speaking his hands were busy. "When you've finished tearing up my newspaper," said Bellows. "Sorry, sir," said the man. He pushed the newspaper away from him, but caught up a corner of the tablecloth. It was frayed, and he began to pull threads out of it. quickly and eagerly. "Ever been hypnotized?" Bellows asked. "No, sir," said Smith, with a cunning smile. "But that doesn't matter, does it? I can act the part all right." "It matters a devilish lot, as it happens, and you can't act the part all right either. My assistants are always genuinely hypnotized. I employ them to save time on the stage. After I have hypnotized you a few times, I shall be able to put you into the hypnotic state in a minute or less, and to do it with certainty. I can't depend on chance people from the audience. Many of them cannot be hypnotized at all, and with most of the others it takes far too long. There are exceptional cases. I had one at my show only last night, but I don't often come across them. Come on up with me to my room." "You want to see if you can hypnotize me?" "No, I don't. I know I can. I simply want to do it." Upstairs in the dingy bedroom, Bellows made Smith sit down. He held the bright lid of a cigarette tin between Smith's eyes and slightly above the level of them. "Look at that," he said. "Keep on looking at it. Keep on." In a few minutes Bellows put the tin down, put his fingers on Smith's eyes and closed them. The eyes remained closed. The little hunchback sat tense and rigid. An hour later, in the coffee room downstairs, Bellows made his definite agreement with Smith. "You understand," said Bellows. "You'll be at the town hall at Warlow tomorrow night at 7. When I invite people to come up on the platform, you will come up. That's all you've got to do. Got any money? Enough for the present." Smith began to pull matches from a box on the table. He broke each match into 4 pieces. "But suppose that tomorrow night you can't do it?" "There'll never be a day or night I can't do it with you now. That's definite. Now, then, leave those matches alone. I might be wanting one of them directly." After Smith's departure, Percy Bellows sat for a few minutes deep in thought. In that dingy room upstairs he had seen something which he had never seen in his life before, something of which he thought that various uses might be made. He picked up the newspaper, and was pleased to find that Smith's busy fingers had spared the racing intelligence. Then he sought out the landlord. "I say," he said, "I've got a fancy to put a few shillings on a horse. Do you know anybody here it would be safe to do it with?" "Well," said the landlord, "as a matter of fact, you can do it with me if you like. I do a little in that way on the quiet. The police don't bother you?" "No, they're not a very bright lot, the police here. Besides, they're pretty busy just now. We had a murder in Teston the day before you came." "Who was that?" "Miss Samuel, daughter of some very well-to-do people here. I think it was a tramp. See that plantation up on the hill there? That was where they found her. Her head all beaten to pulp and her money gone. Nice set of blackguards you've got in Teston, I don't think. Well now, about this race today." When Percy Bellows left the Victoria Hotel on the following morning, he was not required to pay a bill. On the contrary, he had a small balance to receive from the landlord. "Bless you, sir, I don't mind," said the landlord as he paid him. "Pretty well all my crowd were on the favourite. Queer thing that horse should have fallen." At Warlow the entertainment went very well. When it was over, Bellows asked Smith to come round to the hotel. They had the little smoking room to themselves. "You remember when I hypnotized you yesterday?" "Yes, sir. Yes, Mr Bellows." "Do you remember what you did or said?" Smith shook his head. "I went to sleep the same as I did tonight. That was all." "Know anything about horse racing?" "Nothing. Never touched it." "You mean to say you've never seen a horse race?" "Never." "What did you do before you came to me?" "I had not been in any employment for some time. I was once in business as a bird fancier. I had bad luck and made no money in it." "You ask me a great many questions, sir." "I do. That's because I've been turning things over in my mind. I want you to put your name to an agreement with me for 3 years, £1 a week. That's a good offer. A man who's been in business and failed ought to appreciate an absolute certainty like that." "It would be the same kind of work?" Smith asked. "Pretty much the same. When I've finished this tour, I'm thinking of settling down in London. I should employ you there." "No, thank you, Mr Bellows," said Smith. "I would rather not." "Oh, all right," said Bellows. "Make an idiot of yourself if you like. It doesn't make a pin's head of difference to me. I can easily find plenty of other men who would grab at it. I thought I was doing you a kindness. As you said yourself, chaps of your build don't find it any too easy to get work. I'll work for you for 6 months, possibly a month or two longer than that. But afterwards, well, I wish to return to the bird fancying again." "No, you don't," said Bellows savagely. "If you can't take my terms, you're not going to make your own. If you won't sign for 3 years, out you get. You're talking like a fool, too. How can you go back to this rotten business in 6 months? Do you think you're going to save the capital for it out of £1 a week?" I have friends who might help me." "Who are they?" "They are, well, they're friends of mine. You will perhaps give me till tomorrow morning to think it over." "Very well. If you're not here by 10 tomorrow morning to go round to the solicitor's office with me, I've finished with you. Now then, I'm going to hypnotize you again." "What for?" "Practice. Now then, look at me." In a few moments Smith sat with his eyes open but fixed. "Tell me what you see," asked Bellows. "Nothing," said Smith. "I see nothing." "Yes, you do," said Bellows. "There are horses with jockeys on them. They're racing. See? They get near the winning post." "Yes," said Smith dully. "I see them, but it is through a mist and a long way off. Now they've gone. Yesterday, when I hypnotized you, you saw clearly. You actually described a race which afterwards took place. You gave me the colours. You gave me the names that the crowd shouted. You described how the favourite crossed his legs and fell. Can you do nothing of the kind today?" "No, not today. Today I see other things." "What?" "I see a street in London. There is a long row of sandwichmen. My name is on their boards. There are many fashionable people in the street, expensive shops, jewellers' shops, picture galleries. I can see you too. You have just come into the street." "Where have I come from?" "How can I tell? It may be your own house or offices. Your name is on a very small brass plate by the side of the door. You have got a fur coat on and you're wearing a diamond pin. You get into a car. It's your own car, and you tell the man who opens the door for you to drive to the bank. You look very pleased and prosperous. Now the car starts. That is all. I can see no more." Bellows leaned forward and blew lightly on Smith's eyes. The tenseness of his muscles relaxed. He rubbed his eyes and stood up. "Do you know what you've been saying?" Bellows asked. "I've been saying nothing," said Smith. "I have been asleep, as you know. You made me go to sleep." Bellows looked round the room. His eye fell on an empty cigarette box lying in the fender. "Pick that up and hold it in your hands," he said. Smith looked surprised, but he did as he was told. There was a loose label on the box, and his fingers began to tear it off in small pieces. "Now then," said Bellows, "can you tell me anything about the man who had that box and threw it down there?" "Of course I can't. How should I be able to do that? It's not possible." "Very well," said Bellows. "I'm going to put you to sleep once more." "I don't like this," whined Smith. "There's too much of it. It's bad for one's health." "Nonsense. Look here, Smith. I want you for 3 years, don't I? Then I'm not likely to do anything that will injure your health. You'll be all right." When Bellows had hypnotized Smith, he again put the cigarette box in his hands. "And now what do you see?" he asked. "This is quite clear. It is a short, thick-set man who takes the last cigarette out of the box and throws it down. As he smokes it, he walks up and down the room, frowning. He is puzzled about something. He takes out his pocket-book, and as he opens it, a card drops to the floor. Can you see what's on the card?" "Yes, it lies face upwards. The name is Mr Vincent. And in the left-hand corner are the words Criminal Investigation Department, Scotland Yard." Now he closes his notebook. "What was written in it?" "I only saw one word, the name Samuel." Now a waiter comes into the room, and the man asks for a timetable. Once more Bellows restored Smith to his normal state. "That'll do," he said. "That's all for tonight. You can be off now and think over that offer of mine." At 10 on the following morning Smith kept his appointment. He said he would sign an agreement for 2 years only, and that he would want 30 shillings a week. "What makes you suddenly think you're worth 30 shillings a week?" "I have no idea at all, but I know you need me very much. I have that feeling." "It was 3 years," I said, "not 2. If I pay you 30 shillings a week, you can sign for 3 years." "I cannot. I want to get back to my birds. I will sign for 30 shillings a week for 2 years, or I will go away." "Oh, very well," growled Bellows. "You're an obstinate little devil. Have it your own way. I hope to goodness I'm not going to lose money over you. I've never paid more than £1 to an assistant before. By the way, Smith, were you ever in London?" "Yes, several times." "Do you know Piccadilly or Bond Street or Regent Street?" Smith shook his head. "I've only passed through in going from one place to another. I know the names of those streets, but I've never been in them." "Very well," said Mr Bellows. "Come along with me and we'll fix up the agreement." About a month later, Mr Bellows, who had come up to London for the purpose, called at the office of Mr Tangent's agency in Sussex Street. "Appointment," said Bellows, as he handed in his card, and was taken immediately into the inner office. Mr Tangent, a florid and slightly overdressed man of 50, rose from his American desk to shake hands with him. "Well, my dear old boy," said Tangent, "and how are you?" "Fit," said Bellows, "remarkably fit." "And what can I do for you?" I had an inquiry the other day that brought you to my mind. It's not much. A week with a chance of an engagement if you catch on." "Thanks, old man, but I don't want it. I've got on to something a bit better. What I want from you is £150. Tangent laughed genially. "Long time since I've seen so much money as that. Well, well, what's it for? Tell us the story." "I've had a bit of luck, Tangent. I've got a man booked up to me for the next 2 years who is simply the most marvellous clairvoyant the world has ever seen." "Clairvoyants aren't going well," said Tangent. "Most of them don't make enough to pay for their rent and their ads in the Sunday papers. The fact is, there are too many of them. I don't care what the line is, palmistry, crystal gazing, psychometry, or what you like. There's no money in it." "Let's talk sense. You say there's no money in it? Do you remember when Merian fell and a 10-to-1 chance romped home?" "Remember it? I've good reason to. I'd backed Merian both ways and didn't see how I was going to lose." "Well, I backed the winner. Not being a Croesus like yourself, I only had 5 bob on. I backed him because my clairvoyant saw the whole thing and described it to me before the race was run. Can he do it again?" "He's not been able to do it again yet. He has seen what happened in the past many times, and he has never been wrong. He is exceptional. He is only clairvoyant when he's hypnotized. In the normal state he sees nothing. He's an ugly little devil, a dwarf, and if I bring him to London he'll make a sensation. What's more, he'll make money, pots of money. I know the crowd you've been talking about. They're a hit or miss lot. They're no good. This is something quite different. We shall have all the society women paying any fee I like to consult him. There's a fortune in it." Tangent lit a cigarette and pushed the box across to Bellows. "What is it you propose to do?" he asked. "Rooms in Bond Street, good furniture, uniformed servant, sandwichman at first. Once the thing gets started, it will go by itself. Any woman who's consulted him once is absolutely bound to tell all her friends. The man's a miracle. I'll tell you another thing I'm going to do. When the next sensational murder turns up, and Scotland Yard can't put their hands on the man who did it, I'm going to turn my chap onto the job. I'll bet all I've got to sixpence that we find the man." "There was the case of that girl, Esther Samuel." "Yes, I remember that. But by this time most of the public have forgotten it. A better chance is bound to turn up soon." "I don't see how you're going to start on 150. "I'm not, my boy. I've got money of my own that I'm putting into it as well." "Let's see," said Tangent, picking up a pencil. "What did you say was this man's name and address?" Bellows laughed. "Oh, no, you don't," he said. "At present that's my business. Make it your own business as well, and you shall be told everything." "I don't know why you should call it a business at all. You asked me to lend you 150. You offer no security. All I've got is your story that you found a clairvoyant who's really good." "Very well. If you satisfied yourself that the man was really good, would you lend the money then?" "On terms, yes, but they'd have to be satisfactory terms." "They would be. Well, you shall see for yourself. The man's waiting in a cab downstairs." "You might have said that before." "Why?" "Anyhow, I'll go and bring him up now." It was a chilly morning, and Smith shivered in a thick overcoat which he refused to remove. No time was wasted on preliminaries. Bellows hypnotized him at once. "Now then, my boy," said Bellows, "you shall see for yourself. Give me any article which you or someone else has worn or has frequently handled." Tangent opened a drawer in his desk and produced a lady's glove. "That," he said, "was left in my office a week ago. Let's see what he makes out of it." Bellows put the glove in Smith's hands. Smith began to pull the buttons off it. He dragged and tore at the glove like a wild animal at its prey. Then suddenly he began to speak. "I see a handsome woman with bright golden hair. I think the hair has been dyed. It has that appearance. She is talking with Mr. What's-his-name in this room. Each is angry with the other. She is accusing him of something. Suddenly, yes, she picks up an ink bottle and throws it at him. Ink all over the place. He bangs on a little bell, and a man comes in who looks like a clerk. That is all. I cannot see any more." "Wake him up and send him down to the cab again," said Tangent. "Then we can talk." "Now," said Bellows, when they were alone together, "had he got that right?" "Absolutely. The woman was Cora Vendall. She wanted a particular berth, and thought I ought to have got it for her. She's 56 if she's a day, and not in any way suitable for it. If I had proposed it, the people would simply have laughed at me. She did get into a blind fury with me, and she did throw the ink at me. She's been made to pay for that, and she's been told not to show her powdered nose inside my office again." "Your man is remarkable, Bellows. There can be no two opinions about it. There is certainly money in him." You'll find the 150 then? Yes, I'll do that. Mind, I must have a word to say in the management. The right sort of people will have to be got to see that man. Once that has been done, I do believe you're right, and the thing will go by itself. What interest do you want? I don't want interest. What I do is to buy for £150 a share in your profits from your agreement with the clairvoyant. You shall have it. It's a jolly good thing I'm putting into your way, Tangent. I had never meant to part with a share, and I'd sooner pay you 15% on your money. However, if you insist, you can take a 16th. Rats, said Mr. Tangent impolitely. This is not everybody's business. Step across to the Bank of England and see how much they'll advance you on it. There are 3 of us in it, him and you and me. I'm going to take a third. Do just as you like about it. If I go into it, I can make it a certainty. I can get the right people to see the man. A third's too much. You must be reasonable, Tangent. I discovered him. A man once discovered a gold mine. He had no means of getting the gold out. He was 1,000 miles from anywhere, and he was all alone. He died on the top of his blessed gold mine. However, I'm not arguing. I'm simply telling you. Give me a third, and my cheque and the agreement will be ready this time tomorrow morning. Otherwise, no business. Mr. Bellows hesitated, and then gave in. End of section 1. Recording by Ian Stewart, Rosanna, Victoria, Australia. Section 2 of Stories in Grey. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ian Stewart, Rosanna, Victoria, Australia. Stories in Grey by Barry Payne, Section 2. At 6 o'clock on a summer evening in a well-furnished room that overlooked the traffic of Bond Street, Smith and his employer sat and quarrelled together. Both of them wore new clothes, but Bellows had the air of prosperity and Smith had not. "It's no good to talk to me," whined Smith. "I know what I'm saying. Where an essential consideration has been intentionally concealed, an agreement cannot stand. You never told me I was a clairvoyant." "No," said Bellows, "I did not. And I don't tell a man what the colour of his hair is either." "Why?" "Because he knows it already. You knew that you were a clairvoyant." "I did not. I swear I did not," said Smith, raising his voice. "Now, don't get excited. Don't squeal." "I'm not squealing. Do you think that if I'd known I would ever have come to you for a wage like that? We've had 14 people here today. What did they pay?" "Mind your own business." "But it is my own business, and as you wouldn't tell me, I've taken my own steps to find out. Not one of them paid less than a guinea. You had as much as 5 guineas from some, and here am I with 30 shillings a week. I can get that agreement set aside. I can prove what I'm saying. I had never been hypnotized until I met you." "Look here," said Bellows, "let us get this fixed up once for all. I don't know who's been cramming you up with these fairy tales about my fees, but I don't get what you think or anything like it. I get so little that I don't want to waste any of it on lawyers. Besides, it would do the business no good, and it would do you no good. I should leave you, and then where would you be? Remember that you are not clairvoyant until I make you clairvoyant. You think perhaps I've not read what the newspapers say about me? I can find 100 hypnotists very easily, but there's no other man who's clairvoyant as I am. And there's no other man who can run a show as I can. Who brought the newspaper men here? Who paid for the advertisements? Who did pretty well everything? However, I'm not going to argue. If you want more money, you can have it. Name your figure. If it is in any way reasonable, you shall have it, on the understanding that this is the last advance you get. If it is unreasonable, you'll get nothing. You can take the thing into the courts, and I'll fight it. And mark my words, Smith, if I do, you may get a surprise. You know nothing at all about hypnotism. You may find yourself in the witness box saying things that you did not intend to say. Now then, name your figure." The little man took time to think it over. He rubbed his chin with his fingers reflectively. He seemed on the point of speaking, and then stopped. Suddenly he snapped out, "I want £4 a week." "It's simply barefaced robbery," said Bellows, "but you shall have it. Mind you, you will have to sign another paper tomorrow, and this time there shall be no doubt about it. If you pay me that, I'll sign anything. With £4 a week I can keep some very good birds again. But you are right that it is barefaced robbery, and I'm the man who's being robbed." There had been many disputes between the two men during the 6 weeks that they had been associated. It was by Tangent's directions that Bellows acted in the present quarrel. "It would be better to pay the little devil £20 a week and keep him than to refuse and lose him," said Tangent. "I believe he's right, and that your precious agreement isn't worth the paper it's written on. Anyhow, I'll get a new agreement ready. Pay him what he wants, and he'll sign it." "Well," said Bellows doubtfully, "if you say so, you're probably right. But in that case we ought to get an extension of time out of him." "No," said Tangent. "The chap's suspicious of you. He hates you. If you try any sort of monkeying, he'll be off. Besides, with the fees you're charging, 2 years will about see it through. There are not such a vast number of people who can afford the game. As things go at present, it looks as though it might last forever. You should see the engagement book. We've got appointments booked for 2 months ahead. It isn't only a game, you see. It's not just a pastime for fashionable women. We get men from the stock exchange, businessmen of all sorts, racing men. Yesterday morning we had the Prime Minister's private secretary. He didn't give his right name, but Smith was onto it, and then he admitted it. Hot stuff, Smith. Do you get much out of him in the way of prophecy, foretelling the future?" "Not very often. He's done some wonderful things that way, but more usually he deals with something that is past." "Why don't you get him to foretell your own future, Percy?" Bellows shook his head. "Not taking any," he said. "He shall have a shot with you if you like." But Tangent also refused. Their business had certainly progressed very rapidly. Tangent arranged a report in a newspaper. He communicated with 1 or 2 doctors whom he knew to be interested in the subject. He sent a couple of popular actresses to Smith. He arranged a special séance for a cabinet minister whose principal interest was psychology. After the first week they no longer employed sandwich men and advertisements. The ball had begun to roll. Everybody who came to Smith sent somebody else. Everybody in society was talking about the hideous little dwarf and his marvellous powers. Bellows was regarded as a showman and a charlatan, but Smith was clearly the genuine thing. Despite their mutual dislike, Bellows and Smith both lived in the same house, the Bloomsbury lodging house. It was Bellows who had insisted on this. He had never felt quite safe about Smith, and even after the new agreement had been signed he had his suspicions. He was afraid that Smith would run away. Bellows occupied fairly good rooms on the first floor. Smith had one room at the top of the house, but this happened to suit him. Through his windows he could get out onto a flat leaded roof. There he made friends with the pigeons and sparrows. The maidservant at the house, who one day saw him out on the roof with the birds all round him, said that it was witchcraft. They were hopping about all over him. Sometimes he put one down and called another up. I never saw anything like it in my life before. She had the hatred of the unusual which is prevalent amongst domestic servants, and gave notice at once. But before the month was up she had grown quite accustomed to seeing Smith playing with the birds, and the notice was revoked. Bellows still used for business purposes the name of Sanders Bell, but he no longer called himself a doctor. He was meeting too many real doctors, and Tangent had advised against it. The room in Bond Street was divided in two by a curtain. The outer part served as a waiting room, and here, too, Bellows had his bureau. In the inner part of the room the actual interview between the client and the clairvoyant took place. Their usual hours were only from 11 to 1 and from 2 to 4, but Bellows would sometimes arrange for a special interview at an unusual hour and an increased price. On these occasions he always took care to pacify Smith. Sometimes he gave him money, and sometimes other presents. On one occasion he gave him a big book about birds with coloured illustrations, and Smith remained docile and in a good temper for days afterwards. "Yes," said Bellows, "you've complained once that I was robbing you. You can't say that now. You have fixed your own salary. If there is the least little bit of extra work to be done, you always get something for it. You are not as grateful as you ought to be, Smith. Where would you have been without me? What were you doing before you came to me?" "Nothing. For some weeks I had been very hungry. I make no complaint against you. But when my time's up I shall stay no longer. I go back to the birds again." "It would be more sensible of you," said Bellows, "if you banked your money. What did you want to buy that great owl for? He makes the devil of a row at night. We shall have people complaining about it." "She is a very good friend to me, that owl," said Smith. "I'm teaching her much. She will be valuable." At this moment there was the sound of a footstep on the stairs, and Smith stepped behind his curtain. The man who entered was not at all the type of client that Bellows generally received. He was a thick-set man of common appearance, and he was unfashionably dressed. He did not look in the least as if he could afford the fee. Bellows saluted him somewhat curtly. "It is 10 minutes to 11, sir, and our hour for beginning is 11. However, as you have called, if you like to pay the fee now, 2 guineas, I will make an appointment for you, but I'm afraid it will have to be in 9 weeks' time." The visitor looked reflective, turning his seedy bowler hat round in his hands. "Don't think that would do," he said. 9 weeks, that's a very long time. Couldn't Mr. Smith see me today? Couldn't he make an exception?" "Only by giving you a special appointment, and for that a very much higher fee is charged." "How much?" asked the man. "He could give you 10 minutes at 1 o'clock today, but the charge for that would be 6 guineas. You see, Mr. Smith is only clairvoyant while in the hypnotic state, and that cannot be repeated indefinitely." The visitor took out an old-fashioned purse from his hip pocket. He pulled out a £5 note, a sovereign, and 6 shillings. "There you are," he said. "Please book me 10 minutes with Mr. Smith at 1 o'clock today." "Very good," said Bellows, opening the engagement book. He looked up with his pen in his hand. "What name shall I put down?" "I am Mr. Vincent." "You'll be careful to be punctual, of course?" "Mr. Smith will be ready exactly at 1 o'clock." "I shall be here," said the man. He had no sooner gone than Smith emerged from behind the curtain again. "What on earth did you do that for?" he asked excitedly. "Keep your hair on, Smith. It's all right. I'm going to buy you a big cage for that owl of yours." "I do not want any cage. My birds are not kept in cages. It is not the extra work that I mind. It is that I cannot do anything for that man. I tell you he is dangerous." "In what way dangerous?" "I don't know. He's dangerous to me. He looked to me an honest chap enough. He had the appearance of a chap up from the country. Probably wants to know what his best girl is doing. I shouldn't worry about it if I were you. Don't stand in the way of business, Smith. You don't know what the expenses are here. I've got to pay the rent next week, and if I told you what that was, you wouldn't believe it. If you don't want the bird cage, you shall have something else." But it was necessary to show Smith a sovereign, and to present him with it before he would consent. Even then he did so with great reluctance. Clients with appointments came in, and the ordinary business of the morning began. Smith no longer spoke when in the clairvoyant state, for he was often consulted upon matters requiring secrecy, and what he said might have been heard by other clients in waiting. He had a writing block, and he scribbled down on it in pencil what he saw. At 1 o'clock precisely Mr. Vincent returned, and was at once brought behind the curtain. Smith sat there motionless. His eyes were open, but he did not look up at Mr. Vincent. "Now then, sir," said Bellows, "what is it you want?" Mr. Vincent drew from his pocket a comb wrapped in paper. It was the kind that women wear in their hair, and it had been broken. "I want him to tell me about the girl who wore this at the time when it was broken." Bellows placed the comb in Smith's hands. Smith held it for a moment, and then the fingers relaxed, and it dropped to the floor. Bellows again placed it in his hand, and this time Smith flung it from him. But immediately he began to write, Mr. Vincent watching him narrowly as he did so. He wrote with an extraordinary rapidity. Presently Bellows, who had been standing behind him and reading what he wrote, asked Mr. Vincent to wait in the outer part of the room. As soon as he was alone with Smith, he took the writing block out of his hands, tore the sheet from it, folded it, and put it in his pocket. Then he rejoined Vincent. "I'm extremely sorry, sir," said Bellows, "that the experiment has failed completely. There is perhaps some kind of antipathy between Mr. Smith and yourself. These things do occasionally happen. I find that he can tell you nothing at all, and under the circumstances I should perhaps return your fee." Vincent did not seem particularly surprised. "Very well," he said. "I had hardly expected to get what I wanted, but I thought I might as well try. I paid you 6 guineas, I think. You seem to be treating me fairly, and I have given you a certain amount of trouble. Suppose you return me 5 of them." The money was handed over, and Vincent departed. Bellows went back to Smith and brought him out of the trance. Smith shivered. "Is he here still?" "No, gone." "Was it all right?" "It was quite all right." "I'm glad he's gone," said Smith. "I was horribly afraid of something. Now I can go out and get my lunch, and I have to buy food for the birds too." "I shouldn't spend too much money on it if I were you," said Bellows. Smith laughed. "It is not very expensive," he said, "and I have made 1 extra sovereign. Why not?" Because in future, Smith, you are going to work for me for much less money, for £1 a week to be precise." "I shall not," said Smith loudly. "I told you once before not to squeal. I don't like it. You will do exactly as I say, and for a very good reason. If you don't, you will be taken to prison, and you will be tried before a judge, and you will be hanged, Smith. Hanged for the murder of Esther Samuel in the woods at Teston." "What makes you say that? How do you know it?" asked Smith. The fingers of his big hands locked and separated and locked again. His eyes were fixed intently on Bellows. He looked excited, but not frightened. "How do I know it?" echoed Bellows. "I have it here in your own handwriting." He tapped his breast pocket. "You do not remember what happened when you were hypnotized. I put a broken comb into your hands. It was a comb which the murdered woman had worn. You began to write at once. You put the rope around your neck, Smith. And that man, the man that I knew to be dangerous, Mr Vincent, I told him that the experiment had failed and returned his fee. He knows nothing. So long as you do exactly what I tell you, you are quite safe." "Who was he, this Vincent?" Bellows shrugged his shoulders. "How should I know? Possibly one of the Samuel family, possibly a tech. If I'd given him what he paid for, we should have had the police in here by now. I've saved your skin for you, Smith. Don't forget it." "Will you read it out to me, the thing that I wrote down?" "No. It tells on everything except the motive." The motive was obvious enough. I was hungry and had no money. I had tramped to Teston and reached there 2 days too soon. I had nowhere to go, and I lived and slept in the woods. I begged from the girl at first, and if she'd given me a few pence, she might have been alive now. She was not the least bit afraid of me. Why should she have been? I was small, misshapen, and looked weak. She was tall and strong. As she turned away from me, she said the tramps in the neighbourhood were becoming a nuisance, and she would send the police after me. Even then, I only meant to hit her once, but that is a queer thing. You cannot hit a human being once. You see the body lying at your feet, and you have to go on striking and striking. When I knew she must be dead, I flung the stick down. I took nothing but the money, nothing which could be traced. Even the money made me so nervous that I hid most of it, buried it in a place where I could find it again. If the police had found me, there would only have been a few coppers in my possession, and I did not look like a man who could have done it. But they never did find me. I see. That was why, when I offered to advance your railway fare, you told me you had money. You had a pair of new boots on when you turned up at Warlow. I remember what an infernal squeaking row they made on the platform. Well, you've done for yourself, Smith. You've got to work for me on very different terms now." "No," said Smith, "that is not so." "Very good. I'll write my note to Mr Vincent now. He'll do the rest." "No, you won't, and I'll tell you why. You can destroy me very likely, but if you do, you'll destroy your own livelihood, and you always take very good care for yourself, Mr Bellows." "Destroy my livelihood," said Bellows, thumping on the table with his fist. "That's where you make your mistake, you little devil. Because you're useful, you think you're indispensable. You're not. There's a reward of £200 out for anyone who finds the murderer of Esther Samuel. I'm a born showman. With £200 capital, I can chuck this and start something else that will pay me just as well. It looks as if I shall have to give in. Well, there's no help for it. I must get a much cheaper room, of course." "No, you won't. You'll stop in the same house as me. Do you think I haven't worked it all out? After you've paid your rent, you've a shilling a day for food, and better men have lived on less. I'm not going to give you a chance to bolt. And mark my words, Smith, if you do bolt, the very moment I find you've gone, I give you up. Don't imagine you can get away. There are not many men of your build. The police would have you for a certainty within 24 hours. Then I become a slave. I can do nothing. There were other birds that I meant to buy, and in time I could have started a business again. That must all go." "Quite so. That must all go. In fact, before a fortnight is out, I expect you'll sell that big white owl of yours. You'll grudge him his keep. It is a she-owl, and I shall not let her go. She can do things that would surprise you." "Can she?" said Bellows. "It might be rather effective if you brought her down here. She would impress clients." "I shall not. I keep her for myself." "Don't talk like a fool. You're forgetting that I hold you between my thumb and finger. If I tell you to wring that bird's neck, you will have to do it." Smith rose to his feet in fury. "Where's my hat?" he said. "Give me my hat." Bellows stood in front of the door. "What's the matter with you? Where are you off to?" "Checkmate for you, Mr Bellows. I'm going now to give myself up." "Where is your £200 reward, eh? Where is the money that you make out of the clairvoyant?" Sit down and don't talk in that silly way. I never told you to kill the bird. I was only speaking in your interests when I said I doubted if you could afford to keep it. As a matter of fact, I don't care a pin's head about it either way. If you set so much store by it, keep it by all means." "In that case," said Smith, "I will go on working for you and on the terms that you have said." "That's all right. And now you can go out to lunch. Remember that you have to be back at 2 o'clock. If you're not here by 10 minutes past 2, I shall send the police to look for you." "I shall be here, Mr Bellows." Every Saturday morning at 9:30, Tangent called on Bellows in Bond Street to look over the books and to collect his share of the profits. Tangent had no great faith in Mr Bellows. Smith was never allowed to be present on those occasions. On the Saturday after Mr Vincent's visit, Tangent was well pleased with the results. "Mind you," he said, "the little dwarf isn't doing so badly out of it either. He gets his regular £4 a week. This week I see he's had £1.10 in cash for extra work, and you're charging 12 6 for a present to him. What was the present?" "Oh, a bird of sorts. The little beggar's simply mad about birds. That did more good than if I'd given him the actual cash." "Oh, I'm not grumbling, Bellows," said Tangent, surveying with complacency the diamond ring on his finger. "If, by giving him a trifle extra now and then, you can keep his goodwill, it's quite worth our while to do it. No man will work for nothing, and I suppose he finds this clairvoyance game rather exhausting. Not over and above good for the health, eh?" "He says it's exhausting. He seems to be well enough." When Tangent had gone, Bellows smiled. To swindle Tangent was a real pleasure to him, even apart from the profit he had made for himself. He remembered the terms which Tangent had forced him to accept for the provision of capital for the enterprise. The introduction of a large white owl into the Bloomsbury lodging house could have but one effect. The maidservant gave notice at once on general principles. It was Smith this time who persuaded her to remain. "You must not be afraid of the white owl," he said. "Owls are wise birds. She knows who my friends are and who my enemies are. You are my friend, and she will never hurt you. She will let you feed her and stroke her feathers. They are very, very soft, the feathers of an owl." In a week's time Jane was neglecting her work to play with the white owl out on the leads. For several weeks no change took place. Smith did his work with patience and docility. He addressed Mr Bellows with respect. He made very little objection to private engagements. As a munificent reward, on 2 occasions Bellows took him out to lunch, and once presented him with some Sunday tickets for the Zoo, which he himself did not want. Every Saturday Tangent inspected with satisfaction some purely fantastic accounts. Bellows was specially careful that Smith and Tangent should never meet, lest a discrepancy between the statements in the books and the actual facts should be discovered. And then business began to drop off. There was no excessive drop, but the previous standard was not quite maintained. That astute showman, Mr Bellows, decided that something would have to be done. Some new feature would have to be introduced to set people talking again. "Smith," he said one day, "didn't you tell me something about a white owl?" "Yes," said Smith, "I have one. It does tricks, don't it?" "It does a few things," said Smith grudgingly. "You do not want it. You said that you would leave me my owl. You needn't get into a stew about it, and do for goodness' sake keep those great hands of yours still. They get on my nerves. Nobody wants to take your blessed owl away from you. The only thing that I was wondering about is whether it might not be worth while to keep the bird here instead of at your lodgings." "No, sir. No, Mr Bellows. It is in my leisure time that I want my owl." Well, I was talking to Mr Tangent about it, and he thought it was a good idea. In fact, he said I ought to have done it before. We must think about it. I've been pretty easy with you, Smith. Also, I've worked very hard for you. You've done what you were told, and of late you've given me no trouble. You might let Tangent and myself have a look at the bird, anyhow. It would be effective, you know, the dwarf clairvoyant and the great white owl on the back of his chair. Tangent spoke of a poster. I'll tell him to give us a call in Bloomsbury on Sunday morning. I do not want my owl to be taken away. It lives there on the leads outside my window. Here it would be unhappy. How could I leave it here all night alone? Don't be unreasonable, Smith. You will see more of the bird then than you do now. No, said Smith. The greater part of the time when I'm here I'm like a dead man and know nothing. Bellows had quite realized that this was the point on which Smith would have to be handled carefully. Look here, he said. I wouldn't do anything to hurt the bird. At any rate, let Mr Tangent and myself see it. Let us see if it can really do the things that girl Jane jabbers so much about. If Tangent and I think it would be an asset to the show, I'm prepared to go quite beyond our agreement. I'll give you 2 or 3 shillings for yourself, Smith. You can give yourself a treat. You've not been having many treats lately. In fact, you look just about half-starved." It was true. The little dwarf had grown very thin. His eyes seemed to have got bigger and brighter. There was a look in them now which would have made Bellows suspicious if he'd noticed it. "Jane," said Smith, as he met her on the stairs that night, "they are coming on Sunday morning to see my owl." "Then they'll see miracles," said Jane with confidence. "And they're going to take it away. If that bird goes, I goes." Smith burst into a peal of mirthless laughter. Mr. Tangent arrived in a taxicab at the Bloomsbury lodgings at 11 on the following Sunday morning. He was in a bad temper and swore and grumbled profusely. "So I've got to turn out on a Sunday morning and work 7 days a week just because you're such a damn bad showman, Bellows. You've let the thing down. The books on Saturday were perfectly awful." "I'm not a bad showman, and it's not my fault. The weather's been against us, for one thing, and besides, no novelty lasts forever. We must put something else into it to buck it up, and we must get that poster out. That means more expense. I don't see why we should keep on paying Smith £4 a week if business is falling off. And as for that rotten old owl of his, I'm no great believer in it. It will look all right on the poster, but it will do no good in your Bond Street rooms. I know those tricks. The bird picks out cards from a pack, or Sham's dead, or some other nursery foolery. Stale, my boy, hopelessly stale." "According to what I hear, the bird does none of those things. It's a new line." "Is it? I'll bet $1 it ain't. However, tell Smith to bring it down and let's get it over." "Smith won't bring it down. We shall have to go up to it. He makes a great favour of showing it to us at all. And if you'll take my tip, you'll say nothing to Smith beyond a good morning. I can tell you he wants devilish careful handling about this bird of his. If you interfere, you'll spoil it. All you've got to do, if you think it at all remarkable, is to say to me that it might possibly do. I shall understand. Now then, come along up." "All those stairs," groaned Tangent. He was a heavy and plethoric man. When they reached Smith's room, he stood for a minute, panting. The room was ordinarily dingy enough. It was a fine morning, and the sun streamed in through the window. On the leads outside they could see the great white owl perched on the bough of a tree which had been fixed there. Smith, with his hat off, stood beside it, and seemed to be talking to it. Around his feet were a flock of pigeons and sparrows. He nodded to the 2 men, and then gave one wave of his hands. The pigeons and sparrows flew off and left him alone with the white owl. "Funny sight," grunted Tangent. "Devilish funny sight." Smith opened the window and called into the room. "Good morning, gentlemen. Will you come out?" "Don't much like it," said Tangent. "I've no head for this kind of thing." "Oh, you're all right," said Bellows. "You needn't go anywhere near the edge." He placed a chair for him, and Tangent climbed out onto the roof, followed by Bellows. "I will leave you to look at the bird by yourselves, gentlemen," said Smith, and stepped down into the room. "Then who's going to make the bird do its tricks?" asked Tangent. "It's a fine-looking beggar anyhow. Seems about half asleep. Tame enough." He passed his jewelled hand over the snowy plumage on the bird's breast. "There's a feather bed for you," he said, laughing. The bird opened its eyes and leapt straight into the face of Bellows. Its plumage half stifled him. Its sharp claws tore his eyes. He screamed for help. Tangent, in horror, had flung himself down flat on the leads, covering his face. Within the room, Smith stood with folded arms, watching the scene with the utmost calmness. Bellows tore at the bird with his hands, but step by step it forced him back. There came one final scream from him, and then 2 seconds of silence, and then the thud as his body struck the stones below. Up above, the white owl flew swiftly away. The dwarf rubbed his hands and laughed, and then, changing his expression to one of extreme dismay, went to the help of the prostrate Tangent. End of section 2. Recording by Ian Stewart, Rosanna, Victoria, Australia.
Chapter 2 of Stories in Grey. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Stories in Grey by Barry Payne. Chapter 2. The Autobiography of an Idea. Part 1. Before Birth. I am a literary idea. Unborn as yet, I have not the incarnation of paper and printing ink which will be mine hereafter. I am conscious. I have knowledge without the usual apparatus for its acquisition and storage. I see without eyes and hear without ears. I move as I will, and material things cannot hinder my movements. They are swifter than light and just as swift as thought. You know, of course, that if an idea is going to come to you, neither locked doors nor iron walls will prevent it. It arrives inevitably and insuperably. You are to be its parent and make it come into the world. You may be ranked as a genius because you are its parent, and, this amuses me, you will think that you are its parent because you are a genius. To the large eyes of the imagination, I might be pictured, in my unborn state, as a puck-like phantom. Only the imagination can see me until I select my parent. Ideas have that privilege. Human beings, on very slight evidence, believe that they do not select their parents. But, on the other hand, they believe on no evidence at all that they do select their ideas. I am not prescient, but I fancy that the man whom I select for my parent should be a very happy man. I am a perfectly brilliant idea. I am new, and I am a master. The world will say it. I shall bring fortune and fame to my parent. Even now, when I am unborn and cannot tell the precise form that I shall take, I exult in my own utter goodness. This is, of course, vain. But then humility is only one of the impositions of the weak majority upon the strong minority, to enable the weak majority to keep up a self-respect to which facts do not entitle it. I decided to come here. Before me lies a vast mass of building materials, sorted out into houses and the like, and known on the 18-penny folding map as London and its environs. It swarms. It is too large. Let me see what is immediately before me. Before me is number 23 Harriet Terrace, Fulham. It is a new terrace of 30-pound houses, and there is no external difference, except the number, between 23 and the rest. It is the residence of Albert Weeks, literary hack. Shall I enter and bid Albert Weeks be my parent? I should bring him money and reputation. He would be able to live in a better house than this. People would come to him and say, "Albert Weeks, where did you get that perfectly splendid idea?" He would taste popularity, smile complacently, and subscribe to a press-cutting agency. Shall I select him or not? He might possibly, after he had become my parent, be unable to reach the same level again. But that disaster rarely happens. Ideas and sheep follow where there are ideas and sheep in front of them. Genius is more often chronic than acute. I do not think that I should have to reproach myself with having caused him ultimately the bitterest failure, the failure of a man who once succeeded. But shall I select him? Albert Weeks is married, of course, and has 3 children. His wife is well-meaning, but, I fear, a trifle undereducated. He met her in the old days when he was on a kind of a spree. His love-making was a kind of a spree. There was a touch of sheer spree even in his marriage. It was all irresponsible, enthusiastic, desperate, and the spree is well out of their lives forever and ever, unless I interfere. They are still heart-fond of each other, though she has ceased to remark on his cleverness and sometimes is almost snappish, and he has no time to pet her because he is so busy for so little remuneration. The front room in which he is sitting is rather sordid. They call it the drawing-room, sometimes substitute it for the nursery, and habitually use it as his study. There is a quaint gathering of antagonistic furniture. He bought as little furniture as possible at first, because he was no fool and knew that they would have to be economical, and he has added to it since on occasions when he could not possibly afford it. There are, for instance, 2 chairs from a drawing-room suite. 2 only. These are covered with pale green velvet, and the velvet is covered with dust. On the chair nearest to the table at which he is writing stands a chipped cup of cold tea, surmounting the dust and the velvet. The cold tea seems to be looking upward with a grey, patient eye at the gaudy paper lampshade, the photogravure of the prodigal son, and the smoked ceiling. It is a room that must always have had crumbs in it. Houseflies go long distances in order to die in this room. They have died conspicuously and frequently in it. In one corner, broken and bygone bamboo has now definitely despaired of ever signifying refinement, and in the one piano sconce which is not broken lingers the stump of a candle that has wept its composite heart out over the stained keyboard, wept for the death of the flies, and the despair of the bad bamboo, and the general deadliness of everything. There is on the table a handsome, black-spotted wedding present of an inkstand. In front of it sits Albert Weeks at work. He is rather a small man, with sandy hair and the frock coat which he has given up wearing out of doors, or when, as his wife says, there are people. There are not any now, for he is alone in the room. The expression of his face is careful. He has to be careful, because the editor of the Inner Circle was by no means satisfied with his last batch of paragraphs, and he cannot afford to be deprived of the guinea a week which he receives from the very fashionable journal. The editor had said, though more rudely, technically, and briefly, that either Mr. Albert Weeks would have to convey a more convincing impression of his intimate acquaintance with high society, or the Inner Circle would dispense with his valuable services. The words that the editor, who was rather less fashionable than his penny-panting paper, actually used were, "More savvy or outside only, my dear boy, and don't you forget it." What are you to do when you are too good to know the butler, and not good enough for the butler's master to know you? This is what, I perceive, Albert Weeks is doing, writing laboriously. The season is dying fast, and I am sure that most of my readers will agree with me that it has been an unusually brilliant one. So everybody was saying to me at Lady Bollingham's last night. By the way, Lady Bollingham must have the secret of eternal youth. Last night she looked more beautiful than ever. As for her house in Park Lane, I have always considered it to be quite the most charming town-house that I have seen in the whole course of my experience. Well, the long round of delightful and luxurious. Here he is interrupted, because his worn-out, striving, vulgar, respectable, loving, sharpish wife had come into the room with the blue paper in her hand. "Supper, Albert. Come on now. Oh, you ain't touched your tea, and I was particular to bring it. Are you coming? Henry has broken the soap dish in the nursery. That's what the crying was about. This here is Bilderspin's for what he did to the kitchen range. It's I. 117.6. That is the last straw. His editor has bothered him. His work has bothered him. He is very tired. A paragraph, which was really coming out very nicely, has been interrupted. Money is very scarce, and supper is mere mutton, and his wife looks rather ill, and Bilderspin is 117.6. The combination overpowers him. The little man throws down his pen, stamps his foot, and swears like a mad blackguard, swears profusely. His wife takes a step backward, as if to get out of the room. Then her face becomes twisted. She sits down on the music stool, and suddenly begins to cry. She is shaken with sobs. "Oh, Albert! Oh, Albert!" she says over and over again. And then, "How can you be so cruel? Aren't things bad enough without that?" Then he goes quickly to her, and is remorseful. He is not angry with her, of course. It is only that things are going so badly. He takes her hand. She regains her composure. She is sure that he is quite overworked, but he ought not to give way. On the contrary, he should hope for the best. There is a good deal of make-believe cheerfulness over the mere mutton subsequently. Now then, shall I make this man my parent? If I crept through that sandy hair into the whitey-gray brain, what a change there would be! He would be conscious that he had got a new, tremendous, imperial idea. He would put down his knife and fork, finish the beer in his glass at one gulp, explain hurriedly to his wife that he was really inspired this time, and rush wildly at the handsome inkstand and his work. By the following midday I should be in manuscript. In 6 weeks Albert would be famous. In 6 months he would have real money and no debts, and there would be more money to come. There would be a new soap dish, new furniture, new dresses for his wife. Henry would have toys and a go-kart. Albert would, on little occasions, have a Heidsieck. They would be off to the seaside for a fortnight, and do the thing well, and the personal paragraphs would say that Mr. Weeks and his family were spending the winter in Brighton, where it is to be hoped that this new and brilliant author will not allow his pen to be idle. No, I definitely decide that I will not make Albert Weeks my parent. I am not a philanthropist. I am only an idea. I do not want to benefit Albert Weeks, and I do want to satisfy my own whim. My own whim definitely refuses Albert Weeks. At the same time, I am in a great hurry to be born. I have knowledge, but it is limited. For instance, I believe that I am an idea for a short story, but I am not sure. I know I am a miraculously good idea, but I do not know in what way I am miraculously good. I yearn to see myself in my final form. I must positively get born. Well, let me examine elsewhere. Here, I observe, the traffic is being partially disturbed by a long funeral procession coming briskly back from the cemetery. In the first coach is a young man alone. He is in deep mourning. He has drawn the window blinds down. His hat is placed on the front seat. He himself is kneeling on the floor of the coach. His arms sprawl over the back seat. His eyes are glaring, hot with unshed tears. He bends his head and bites the wrist of one hand. I knew his name at once, and something about him. He is the Honorable Charles Turner Wilmot. Away in the cemetery lies the still body of Maud Faradis, whom Wilmot was to have married 2 months hence if she had lived. The agony of his grief would not be doubted by anyone who saw him now. Yet Wilmot is a man who has always doubted himself. He is haunted with the thought that he is a sham. He once doubted his love for his books, and had himself put up for a sporting club which neither interested him nor desired his membership. The reactionary fit was bitter, but it was short. As with his books, so with his writing. In proud moments he believes that he is going to be a leader. He pays for his pride with days of depression when he doubts whether he is even capable of being a decent follower. As with his writing, so with his love. A few weeks ago he asked himself seriously if he was not merely trying to be romantic, if he really loved this Maud Faradis, who was to be his wife. That doubt went before the pretty yellow-headed girl died, and now he does not doubt his sorrow. Yes, the Honorable Charles Turner Wilmot shall be my parent. He shall bring me into the world. Now, as he sprawls in that mourning coach, his wild, aching brain shall become possessed of me. It is a delightful whim. In I go. Part 2. Birth. The Honorable Charles Turner Wilmot has, later in the same day, in the solitude of his comfortable chambers overlooking Piccadilly, just recovered from rather an unpleasant fit of hysteria. Albert Weeks would have thanked God for me, but Wilmot positively does not want to be my parent. He would cheerfully sacrifice a year's income if by so doing he could definitely get me out of his head. But he cannot. I am going to be born, and this is the first part of the process. The trouble is that I am inappropriate, horribly and grotesquely inappropriate, for I have discovered more about myself, and I find that I am a humorous idea. I am the newest, the most delicious, the most inevitably humorous idea that ever has been or ever will be. The bare thought of me brings a deep satisfaction right away down in the very pit of one's appreciations. At first I am too great for laughter, but the laughter comes. It comes in chuckles. It swells and grows to shaking paroxysms. Here, in this room, but half an hour ago, Wilmot at last reached the full appreciation of me. It had been growing upon him ever since the moment in the morning coach when I first came to him. There had been, at intervals, sudden smiles over his face, succeeded by an expression of agonized shame and contrition. But at the full appreciation of me, he gave up the struggle and began to laugh. He threw back his head, he stamped one foot, he held his sides with both hands, he roared, he howled helplessly. He staggered about the room, doubled up with convulsions of laughter. He tried to stop, but could not. He tried again, and for one moment gravity secured a foothold. Then it slipped, and off he went once more, worse than ever, roaring, howling, screaming, purple in the face. His laughter stopped quite suddenly, as great fits of laughter often do, as if it had been cut short with the clean stroke of a knife. He took out his watch, glanced at it, and, just as he had realized the full humor of me, realized the full horror of the situation, 3 short hours before he stood beside an open grave, wherein he did then most truly believe that all his interest and all the brightness of his life lay. He had wanted the world to stop because Maud Farradas had gone, and there was nothing else of importance. He had heard the robed priest, Maud's cousin, reciting in a voice that tried to be steadier than it was, "From henceforth blessed are the dead which die in the Lord." He had become unconscious then of the service, unconscious of anything but the burning in his heart. Someone had touched him on the shoulder when it was time to go. That was 3 hours ago. And yet he had just finished a fit of the wildest, most uncontrollable laughter. He had been allowing himself to be amused. It was just here that Wilmot had that unpleasant attack of hysteria. He has recovered from it, and has composed himself. His face is very white now, and he looks rather like a man under a curse. He gets out his writing materials. "Maud," he says softly, "you are not minding, are you? This damned thing has got into my head. I didn't want to think of anything humorous, but this came to me. Maud, it would make the dead laugh. It is too funny. And I don't want to think about it any more. That is why I'm going to write it all out. Then perhaps I may be able to put it aside. Oh, Maud, don't think that I'm irreverent and unfeeling. My heart is dead and with you. I hate myself for having laughed, but I had to. I will get rid of this idea that's haunting me, and then I don't think I shall ever laugh again." He sits down, and at the top of the page writes in a large hand, "Ellen." It is the title of the story which is to embody me. He writes fast for half an hour, and then a servant brings in the lighted lamps. "Will you dine in tonight, sir?" he asks, when Wilmot looks up from the paper. "Yes. No. I don't know." He speaks a little absent-mindedly, with one hand on his forehead, shading his eyes, as though he held the idea there and were afraid that it would escape. I have no intention of escaping. "I'm busy. If I want to dine, I'll go to the club. That will be all tonight." "Very good, sir." The moment the servant has gone, the pen dashes down on the paper again, as though it had gained an additional impetus by being kept back for a minute. He does not dine out. He does not go to the club. He writes at lightning speed, only pausing to laugh from time to time more wildly than ever. He laughs and writes and laughs, on and on, until he finds that the lamps are going out, and glances at his watch. It is 5 o'clock in the morning, and the stack of paper in front of him is the finished story. Me, myself. Me, the magnificently humorous idea. He draws back the curtain and lets the wan London daylight into the room. He realizes that he feels very exhausted and shaky, goes to the sideboard in an adjoining room, and gets himself some brandy. He drinks 2 glasses of it in rapid succession. Then he goes off to bed. He is too tired for any further emotion. Laughter and tears alike will be a closed book to him until he has slept. He falls asleep at once and sleeps long, heavily, dreamlessly. And I lie on the table in the study, newborn, in a snow-white manuscript incarnation. Will my reluctant parent burn me in the morning? Part 3. After birth. No, I am safe. safe in a foolscap envelope, directed, sufficiently stamped, whirled about by postal arrangements. It happened in this way. Wilmot came into the study rather late next morning. He looked beaten, humiliated, tired and half-starved. He cast one vindictive glance at me and passed into the next room, where breakfast was ready for him. He was rather a long time over breakfast. When the emotional heart is completely broken up, the ordinary, blood-pumping heart will go on with its work. So with the other organs. Sorrow postpones appetite rather than destroys it. Wilmot had no dinner on the day of Maud's funeral. He had quite a nice breakfast on the following morning. He came back to me at last, and I knew that he meant to destroy me. His face was intentionally rigid, the lips set firm, the eyes merciless. Yet somewhere at the back of that merciless eye lurked a quite different, milder expression. The fried sole and eggs had done their carnal work. An incongruous geniality was struggling upward in him. He was going through the disgusting experience of feeling the better for his food. However, he poked the fire fiercely. Then he lit a pipe, with the air that he did not care about it, but did not think it worth while to omit it. And then he picked me up to hurl me in the fire. As he held me in his hand, his eyes rested for 1 second on the front page. In that 1 second my young life hung in the balance. It was a moment of terrible excitement for me. The eye glanced through a few lines, and I felt a shade safer. The eye twinkled. Then I knew that it was all over, and that my future was assured. Wilmot would not burn me. His habit of doubting himself had triumphed once more. Of course, after that he had nothing to do but to sit down before the fire and argue it out with himself. The story should be published in the Cosmopolitan. Why not? It was unhappy, incongruous, wretched that a humorous idea should have come to him yesterday of all days. But he had not sought for it. He had even struggled to the utmost to put the thing out of his head. After all, if there was any harm done, if there had been any sign of want of feeling on his part, that lay far more in the writing than in the publication of the story. He would never put his name to it, of course. No one should be able to say that Maud's lover took the loss of her lightly, and he would take no remuneration for it. He would forward the amount of the check that he received from the Cosmopolitan to some charity. Besides, what right had he to keep that story from the public? It might not be, probably was not, so splendidly and amazingly good as he had imagined, but still, he knew something of his business, and he knew that it would be likely to be popular. It might cheer many who were ill and depressed, and add something to the sum of human happiness. And he did not think that the critics, with their Athenian longing to see and to hear some new thing, would miss noticing the novelty and spirit of it. Indeed, he had mingled feelings of philanthropy and self-abnegation as he sat down to write, on deep-edged paper, a little note to the editor of the Cosmopolitan. To a certain extent he deceived himself. If Albert Weeks had voluntarily surrendered on sentimental grounds his honorarium for a short story, there would have been something in the sacrifice. But Wilmot had a private income, more than sufficient for all his needs, and to him the surrender of the check meant nothing. His surrender of the reputation, which he believed would attach to the author of Ellen, did amount to something. For he had the weakness cui etiam saepe bone indulgent. But it did not amount to very much, because it is an exceedingly rare thing for a single short story to attract any attention at all, and although Wilmot believed in the chance of Ellen, he knew that it was not more than 1,000 to 1 chance. Nor was there very much in his doubt whether he had the right, for the sake of his personal sorrow, to deny the public an enjoyment. The real reason that swayed him was paternal love. He had made me and seen that I was very good. He could not commit infanticide. He liked to explain himself, but his curious mixture of intense humility and some subtle vanities always made a desperate business of it whenever the real explanation was some simple thing. His note to the editor of the Cosmopolitan ran as follows. My dear Roger, If you will read the enclosed story, you will understand how gladly I could have sent it to you a few weeks ago. As I did not do so then, I do so now. But as you will imagine, with the greatest possible reluctance. I send it because I do really think that it is the kind of thing that I have often heard you say you want. The only condition I make is that my name shall not be put to it or disclosed in connection with it. I send it you today instead of waiting, because I am leaving England and I am trying to put my house in order before I go, and to clear up such business as I have on hand. But I am sure you will appreciate how eager I am to get someplace, any place, where solitude and silence are possible. I fear that this will be my last contribution to the Cosmopolitan. If it were not so melodramatic to say so, I would tell you that from henceforth I am practically dead. Yours ever, C.T. Wilmot. Now I think it must be acknowledged that, for a man who was not, as a rule, a liar, this letter is from a liar's point of view distinctly creditable. I hold that letter in my own, somewhat corpulent manuscript embrace. It and I together, in the twilight seclusion of a foolscap envelope, are at the present being whirled through postal machinery. It is all over. My embodiments have been multiplied, since the Cosmopolitan has sold out 7 editions of the number which contains me, to a marvelous extent. I have been a phenomenal and unprecedented success, in the library of the country house, in the rectory, in Mayfair drawing rooms, in Bloomsbury parlours, in working men's clubs, in public house bars, in England, in America, in the colonies. Everywhere where English, or an approximation to it, is spoken, I am the subject of discussion. There is a touch of the universal about me, and already the translators are busy. Enthusiastic critics have been more screamingly enthusiastic than ever before about me. The severest critics have unbent. I have the additional attraction of a mystery. Only 2 people really know who wrote me. Wilmot, my author, and Roger Berman, his editor, and neither of them will tell. On the authorship of Ellen, only 2 people have dared to question Berman, his assistant editor and his proprietor. Berman has told neither, and quarrelled with both. It is the day of his glory, and he can afford to quarrel with almost anybody. Canards on the subject of my authorship have flown over the country in dense flocks. Albert Weeks has, as usual, drawn his longbow at a venture, and, as usual, missed the joints of the harness. This is his little paragraph on the subject. The secret of the authorship of Ellen has been wonderfully well kept. There are probably not more than 20 people in London who really know it. When the secret is told, and, unless unforeseen circumstances occur, it will be told very soon, there will be howling and gnashing of teeth among various uninformed paragraphists who have been spreading their rumours on the subject. As an instance of the importance which the author attaches to the secret, I may say that one of the 20 in the know is a butler who became possessed of the information by accident, and that he is to be rewarded for his silence with an annuity of £200. More than this I am, unfortunately, not permitted to say at present. Of course, I knew from the first that I was exceedingly good, but still it is very pleasant to have it acknowledged. My success is a joy to me. It is also a joy to Berman. It is also a joy, and this is really terrible, to the Honourable Charles Turner Wilmot. For in this latter case I fear the reaction. Letters, forwarded by the secret hand of Berman, have come to him from the office of the Cosmopolitan. For many editors have been anxious to communicate with the author of Ellen, care of the Cosmopolitan. He has answered none of them. Yet just for a minute he has hesitated. At this time he carefully abstains from any thought of Maud. If such a thought arises, he puts it out of his head again feverishly. That is the trouble. He dare not think about Maud. Maud is apparently not to be denied. The power of the dead has come forth. Wilmot's heart and brain are filled with Maud now. He sees her eyes on him and hears her voice in daydreams and night dreams. He is alone in his rooms, doing nothing, frightened, sickened, humiliated. It seems to him that he had once the belief that, with all his faults, he was at least a man of feeling and honor, and that he has now lost the belief, and that he cannot live without it. He starts from the chair and paces the room slowly in utter agony. His brows are contracted, his eyes ache. Sometimes his hands close convulsively. Sometimes he draws a deep breath, like one who is enduring a torture that kills. It is the reaction. It began yesterday. Yesterday he noticed that he felt uneasy whenever he looked at the little oil painting of Maud that hung above his mantelpiece. He thought that must be because the portrait did no true justice to her, or because it distressed him that any other eyes but his should see Maud's picture. During the whole period of joy in the funny, successful story that he wrote on the night that Maud was buried, he had been ready with shoals of euphemistic, cheerful arguments to prove that he was acting finely. Yet, as a matter of fact, the uneasiness that he felt arose from a kind of fear. He decided to lock the portrait away with her letters in the bureau. As he was doing so, his eyes fell on the first note that he had ever received from Maud. Merely an invitation to dinner, written to save her mother the trouble, written in shy, formal language, and commencing with, "Dear Mr. Wilmot." An impulse seized him to look again, by way of contrast, at the last letter that he had ever had from her. It was written in pencil, just at the beginning of Maud's sudden and fatal illness. It began thus: "They tell me I am very ill, Charlie, and they won't let me write more than just a little letter. They say that they will send you a longer letter themselves, all about the illness. Oh, my poor dear one, I must tell you. I got it out of the doctors that they think I am going to die, perhaps. But I'm not. You've made my life so sweet that I won't leave it. I can't die and be taken away from you. Do not be despairing, my lover. Doctors so often make mistakes, you know, and I'm sure that I shall get better. How could I die when you've made living so well worth while? Oh, dear lover, did any man ever love so finely and nobly as you? I don't deserve you. No, I don't." The letter shook in Wilmot's trembling hand. It was with difficulty that he read on. "I cried so much last night, and you weren't there to comfort me, and I was so lonely. Why?" He had to stop there. His throat moved involuntarily, and he was on the verge of sobbing. Moving slowly and quietly, he put the letters back in the bureau and the portrait back in its place on the wall. He sat down in front of the portrait and gazed at it. A pretty, yellow-haired girl with mournful eyes, who had loved him well and thought him noble. And God had taken her and left him to the composition of an intensely humorous story. Now that he has lost the belief in himself as a man of feeling and honor, he cannot live without it. Late at night he goes out. He goes down to the embankment with the intention of killing himself. He does not do it because he arrives there just in time to stop another man from killing himself. The other man, a stranger to Wilmot, is a young man with sandy hair, to wit, Mr. Albert Weeks. "I think," says Wilmot, speaking firmly, but with a curious smile on his face, "you had better come back with me to my rooms and talk this over." He stops a passing cab. "What's it got to do with you?" Weeks begins. "You happen to have saved my life." "That's a lie. You saved mine, though I didn't want your damned interference. You pulled me back as I was on the parapet. What do you mean by saying I saved your life?" "Ah," Wilmot says with the same dreary smile, "that is what I want you to come and talk about. I also had intended to commit suicide. Surely that is sufficient introduction. Come now, get into the cab." At Wilmot's chambers the servant, with an anxious expression on his face, let them in. It vanished as he saw Wilmot. He had been nervous about his master, and he was glad to see him no longer alone and looking in better spirits. "Have you dined?" Wilmot asked Weeks. "I don't care for it," Weeks answered doggedly. "No? Nor do I. We will suppose dinner. Francis, bring coffee. Yes, and we will have a bottle of the port." Francis recognized the force of the definite article. Albert Weeks felt mazed and wondering. Were the events of the last few days that had driven him to desperation unreal? Or was this unreal? The two men had drawn their chairs up in front of the fire. Albert Weeks sipped the fragrant coffee and blinked his eyes. He was in a kind of dream. Through it he heard Wilmot speaking. "Yes, if it had not been for you, I should have drowned myself tonight." The sight of another man on the verge of committing exactly the same act suddenly showed me that suicide was running away. One should not run away. It is not brave, though brave men have done it through sudden panic. You have placed me under a very great obligation to you. Weeks shook his head. You saved me too. No. I saved you from an isolated act. You saved me from an entirely wrong principle. I do not know whether I make myself clear, but I feel the obligation deeply, and I will speak of it again afterwards. In the meantime, you should know my name. He handed Weeks a card. Weeks glanced at it and said, "I have no card, but my name is Albert Weeks, and I used to live at number 23, Harriet Terrace, Fulham. I was a journalist. I failed. I used to be on the Inner Circle, but I got kicked off. Do you know the Inner Circle? I've seen the posters, but I cannot say that I've ever read it. It's nothing much to read, but it was all I had to live on. I'm married, with children. It was very difficult to get along. Sometimes I got a short thing taken elsewhere, not often. I borrowed a little money on my furniture. When I got kicked off the Inner Circle, I couldn't pay the interest due, and so the Jews took the furniture. My wife and children have gone to her married sister, a Mrs. Warboys. She wouldn't have me, and she grudges the shelter that she gives my wife and children. They'll come to the workhouse. So I haven't lived anywhere the last 2 days. Tonight I sold the last thing I had. It was my mother's wedding ring. Thought I'd buy myself a good dinner before I died." "Then why didn't you?" "Oh, I'd got in the habit of giving my wife anything that I happened to make, so I went into a post office and sent it off to her without thinking." "Go on," said Wilmot. "Well, there wasn't much more. In the letter I sent from the post office, I told her I had a berth to go abroad, and if I could make anything, I would send it. I've cut my name off the linen. If I'd once got into the river, there would have been nothing to identify me by. So she'd have gotten used, gradually, to being without me. And her married sister would have felt she'd more claim for support if she had no husband. Now I must tell you about myself. Well, of course, I know a little about you. I've seen signed things by you in the Cosmopolitan. I was never one of the lucky ones. They wouldn't take me on the swell magazines." "Did you read Ellen?" "Read it and roared over it. So did I. They kept the secret well. I suppose they didn't tell you who wrote it?" "No, they never told me. Fill your glass again." Albert Weeks did so. The wine was warming him, giving him a little more self-confidence and geniality. "This is beautiful port," he said. "Really beautiful port. I can't understand why you should have wanted to commit suicide. You have no money troubles." "None. You live in these comfortable chambers in perfect luxury, with a butler and everything. You can get your stuff taken by the very best papers. I don't say that you've made a real hit like the man who wrote Ellen, but you must be good to get into the Cosmopolitan. It's so much better, you know, Weeks, to be a good man than to be a good author. I had done a disgraceful thing. It did not involve public disgrace. It was not, in the eyes of the law, an offense at all. But it took away my self-respect, and I did not feel as if I could live without it. It was driving me mad. I would rather not speak of the details." "Certainly not," said Weeks. "Now I want to talk over some plans for you, but I must first write a letter. Will you excuse me?" The letter was soon written and given to Francis to post. "Now then," said Wilmot, standing before the fire, "as we have finished our wine, we will smoke a cigar? It seems to me indicated. As I said before, without intending it, you have placed me under a very great obligation. I feel sure that you, as a gentleman, will understand that I should like to show my sense of the position. As some slight acknowledgment of the great service that you have rendered me, I have just sent instructions to my solicitors by which you will, on my decease, receive a legacy of £1,000. You want money now, and I want to give it you. But of course you would not consent to the humiliation of receiving a present of money. A legacy is a different matter, and one can take a legacy." I do not know how to thank you," said Weeks. "I could not, of course, have accepted a present of money. Now I must tell you my plans for you. You love your wife? She and the children are, well, they're naturally the principal thing. Now it is quite evident to me that it is your duty to take them into the country for a holiday. You look overworked." "Oh, I worked pretty hard, but it didn't come to anything. I failed." "Very likely from overwork. Your wife and children, too, will want a change. You must be away at least 2 months. When you come back, I will give you a letter to the editor of the Cosmopolitan. He will do, I may say, a good deal for me. If you can write, he will let you write. If not, he will find some other remunerative occupation for you. And, I think, you would probably like to discharge any pecuniary obligation that you may be under to Mrs. Warboys." "I should, but it is impossible. There is no money." "Oh, some arrangement can easily be made. Let me see. Why not borrow 100 from me, giving me your IOU? Even if it is not convenient for you to pay before my decease the sum to which you are entitled under my will—" "Stop," said Weeks. "It doesn't take me in. You're giving me money. I take it with gratitude. You've saved my life, and you've made it possible for me to go on living. And you've done it all so kindly, treating me as an equal, and no one's been like this to me for a long time. And damn it, I can't even speak about it." He rose and turned to the window with a sob in his throat. Albert Weeks holds a sub-editorial post on the Cosmopolitan now. He has a very comfortable little flat in South Kensington. Wilmot did his best to live without self-respect. He lasted a few years wearing himself out with work. He died of something quite commonplace. But I am still remembered. I am still the standard of humor to which nothing more recent approaches. End of Chapter 2. Recording by Heath Ogden.